everyone. Thanks very much for that introduction, and very thrilled to be here amongst you all and very energized by these exciting speeches so far this morning. So today, as I was listening to all the talks in the morning, there were few key messages which really hit to my core. And those are the ones that I just want to reiterate before I jump into data governance. So those three messages were the importance of treating data as a strategic asset, how data quality is everyone's responsibility and we need to measure what matters, and finally, organizations realizing that their aspirational data management goals are seldom met. So I want you all to keep these three messages in mind as we extrapolate and take it a little bit further as we learn about data governance. Now, data governance is an emerging trend in enterprise information management because organizations are soon becoming serious about the notion of treating data as a strategic asset. And this is so because there is intense competition to survive, and there is also enhanced importance in reporting from a single source of truth. Also, because of legislative mandates in Sarbanes-Oxley Act and Basel II, data governance as a topic has also gained prominence in practitioner conferences like the one held by the Data Warehousing Institute's World Conference and the Data Management Association's International Symposium. Research has evidenced that data governance is required for effective data management strategies. It is only by effective data management that organizations can ensure to produce good quality data which can be measured by its accuracy, completeness, consistency, timeliness, trustworthiness, relevance, and having the right contextual definition. But studies have also shown that organizations which have implemented ad hoc data governance plans have witnessed their data management activities being hampered due to lack of clarity in roles and responsibilities and due to lack of mandate in pursuing data governance or data quality improvement initiatives. So today, the goal of my presentation is to introduce an overall data governance framework which organizations can use to design a cohesive data governance strategy, approach, and plan. A bit much, so how are we going to do that? Okay, so let us look at what are our key session objectives going to be. So first and foremost, we'll learn a little bit more about why we need to treat data as a strategic asset and what are the main barriers that organizations are facing to be able to do that. Then we learn about the need for data management as a discipline. Thirdly, we'll look at what is the requirement for a data governance function in every organization. And last but not the least, we'll learn how to design a cohesive and effective data governance framework. So first thing first, data as a strategic asset. We have heard some about it in one of our previous talks already. To delve a little bit deeper, in today's world, where organizations are facing stiff competition, very smart cybercrimes. Well, it's been in the news in the last couple of days already how there has been a major cyber attack in Australia just last week. Thirdly, because of the increased scrutiny from regulators. Because of these reasons, it's not sufficient for organizations only to know what data they have, but they need to implement proactive and robust data analytics and data management to gain important insights about their products, services, competitors, and the world at large. On the slide, you can see some of the benefits that in a recent poll, companies expressed that their organization will gain, and those benefits are also ranked here by the order of their preference. If you group those, the main benefits that the organizations think they will achieve when their data is treated as strategic asset are financial planning, analysis, reporting, improvement in overall data quality, improved employee morale, reduction in head count, as well as just understanding what data you have and becoming more competitive. Now, if organizations really believe that, then what is stopping us? Well, unfortunately, there are myriad of reasons. First and foremost, companies might have a very challenging system landscape. Overall, they might just have poor data quality. What that means is many companies are still using mainframe systems to capture their customer data. But in order to ingest it to smart GUIs, there are so many interfaces in place. Quite often it happens that the companies don't really understand their data lineage or data definition and how the data is flowing from the source to the ultimate point of consumption. And because of that, data integrity and data quality is often lost from source to the ultimate point of consumption. Finally, there is no consistent understanding of what a particular term or a piece of business data really means. Companies quite often don't even know what data sets are critical to them. Because of all these myriad of reasons, it's quite often difficult for companies to really treat data as a strategic asset. Again, in a recent poll conducted by KPMG, the results are actually quite grim. Only 7% of the companies said that they were satisfied with how their data was being utilized as a strategic asset. 48% of the companies said that they felt somewhat neutral how their data management practices were. And a staggering 72% of the companies said that they still face challenges in treating data as a strategic asset, and they are not really realizing the full value or potential of the data that they have. So how do we move from here to there? How do we become from a very sad person to a happy person? Well, the answer lies in data management. So what is data management? Well, data management is the development, execution, and supervision of a set of policies, practices, and methodologies that various organizations can use to control, enhance, and protect the value of data throughout their life cycle. So if we break it down, what that means? Well, what is the life cycle of a data? So a data originates, it gets transformed, then it gets used, or it gets stored, and then finally it gets destroyed. That's your typical data life cycle, right? So data management strategies would mean that at each of these points, companies have enough mechanisms to ensure that the data quality and data integrity is maintained, and the right data is being used as it is intended for its purposes. So overall, having the right data management practices would enable companies to capitalize on every opportunity, and it will also help them to protect their data as needed and protect themselves from cyber crimes or other regulatory fines that can be imposed due to data breaches. But this does not happen just in a vacuum or by incident. Data management really needs to be intentional, and it requires commitment, ongoing commitment from the management and the leadership team. So data management needs to be principle-based. So let us quickly learn at what are the key principles of data management. Firstly, the value of data needs to be expressed in terms of economic terms. If you just tell your leadership team that, oh, we need to manage data as a strategic asset, well, what does that really mean? So first and foremost, you need to create a business case and you need to quantify the value of your data. That could either be in terms of a revenue growth that you will realize when a particular product or service would be launched, or it can be savings in cost that you can evidence that if you are managing this piece of critical data effectively, then you can save so many $100,000 in fines which might be imposed. So data always needs to be expressed in terms of economic value. Secondly, managing data means managing data quality. Well, that's really the core of it. When you say managing data, it's all about quality and integrity that you are really speaking about. Thirdly, it takes metadata to manage data. Well, we are a group of data practitioners and we all know what metadata is. Metadata is, in simple terms, data about data. There can be two types of metadata. Business metadata, that is, what is the business definition? When you say customer name, what do you really mean by that? And customer name, as it means to the frontline teams, to the help desk team, use customer name as a term in the same context? Well, this kind of consistency in business understanding is very important to establish. Then there is technical metadata. That is the data lineage that flows from your source of origin to your authoritative source to your point of consumption. Is that technical metadata or technical lineage understood? Unless you strike a thorough understanding on your business metadata and technical metadata, data management practices cannot be effective. Then, data management is cross-functional. It requires range of skills and expertise. Data management does not only stop with data analysts. No, it requires range of other experiences. First and foremost, you need sponsorship and support from your executive team and your top bosses out there. Then you need a team of project managers to keep your data management strategies on time. You need data analysts, you need data architecture, you need SMEs to provide you with business requirements in terms of how your data management strategies should really shape up. So data management really requires an enterprise perspective that it needs to be aligned to your business, overall business strategy and your technical strategy, and it requires a range of skills and expertise. Then, data management is about lifecycle management. Well, we just spoke about it, that at every point in your life cycle, you really need to have robust data management strategies. Then managing data includes managing the risks associated with data. Well, this is what has been, the concept has been really introduced by your Basel II, BCBS 239 mandates, which lays down the principles of how every organization must understand their key data risks and then understand the relationship between how poor data quality is contributing to your data risks. And that is how, as you implement your remediation activities and reduce your data risk profile, you can design a very effective data management strategy. And finally, effective data management requires commitment and planning. It cannot happen if the leadership team does not endorse this. So what is data governance then? Well, I came across this analogy which I found quite interesting. What it says, as auditors, they do not themselves participate in financial management, but they always keep a check to ensure that your financial books of accounts are always kept up to date and it's accurately maintained. In a similar way, data governance teams, they do not participate in data management practices themselves, but what they do is that they establish oversight, they establish policies, standards, metrics, and framework to ensure that there is effective and sufficient controls and authority in data management practices in organization. So that's the difference. Data governance is the oversight and data management is execution. So what is then data governance really? So what we are going to do, we are going to divide this into two parts. First, we will look at how data governance can be established at foundational levels in organization, and then we will look at the more operational aspects of data governance. Firstly, how a data governance organization typically looks like. There are three functions. There are three key primary functions that a data governance organization will have. First and foremost, legislative-like functions. So this particular term, what it means, that there has to be an entity or a body in a data governance organization which will formulate your policies, standards, and all the data governance mandates that an organization needs to follow. Then judicial-like functions. That is the team which will ensure that issue management and escalations are properly being managed and they have the traction and the cadence that is required. And finally, executive functions, that is protecting and serving the administrative responsibilities. What it means that somebody is out there who is actually doing the admin part of it. They are actually implementing the data governance plans and policies which have been formulated by the legislative body in the organization. So that's an example of a data governance organization. If you look at it, you will see that it is headed by the chief data officer, and then the topmost or the most senior committee will be the data governance steering committee, which will take decisions like prioritization and funding of data governance initiatives in an organization. That typically consists of the very senior executives of the organization. Then, reporting to the steering committee, there will be a data governance council which will formulate your data governance strategies and policies for the organization, keeping in mind the various businesses that are conducted by different units in the organization. Then there would be a data governance office. This will consist of the various data governance teams which will provide guidance to the different data management teams in the organization as to how they can practically leverage and implement the data governance policies and standards into their day-to-day activities. So that consists of the legislative and the judicial-like functions. Then finally, also in the organization, there will be always a team of your IT teams who are actually working on your technical implementations and resolving the data quality issues, so on and so forth. So this is the team who is responsible for all the administrative responsibilities in actually carrying out and implementing the data governance policies and standards. So what are different types of data governance model types? Well, based on the size of the organization and the operating model, organizations must choose the right type of the right model. Otherwise, the data governance will always fail. For example, organizations which are smaller in size or which are more centralized in nature, they can go for a centralized model in which there is only one data governance function across the whole organization, and that oversees the implementation of data governance throughout seamlessly. Now, organizations which are slightly bigger, however, there is not much diversity across different business units, they can go for a replicated model. That is, each business unit would have the same data governance methodology applied for each and every business unit. However, organizations which are very large and complex and they have diverse kind of business units in them, they would ideally go for a federated model where there is one central data governance office. However, what it does is it coordinates with the data governance officers at various business units just to ensure that there is a consistency in the standards and policies which are implemented across all business units. However, every business unit will have its own variation of what the practical implementation of data governance policies and standards mean for them. So really depending on your business model and overall strategy, organizations must choose what is the right model for them. Then, once we know how our overall organization will be designed, and we also know which operating model we are choosing, then we need to determine what is going to be our operating framework. Well, this is where organizations must do a good amount of feasibility analysis. First of all, the value of data to the organization. Organizations like Amazon and Facebook, to whom data is like their commodity, well, for their data governance will become really the backbone of them, and they really need a very advanced data governance framework to be implemented. On the other hand, organizations where data is just like an operational lubricant, well, I'm not saying that data governance is not important for them, it is, but however, organizations for which data is like their commodity, for them the data governance practices just need to be smarter and more intense. Secondly, business model. As I said in the previous slide, organizations must always do feasibility analysis on what is their overall business model and operating model before deciding the data governance framework. And finally, the cultural factors. Nobody likes discipline and governance, to be honest. However, there are organizations which will resist change more than others. So you need to do a feasibility analysis to understand how easy or difficult it will be for your organization to adapt to a set of discipline and governance policies, and accordingly, you must design a change management strategy which will be consistent with your overall data governance framework, and you also need to identify the number of advocates and champions that you will have depending on the cultural factor. Finally, impact of regulation. Well, I work with a bank, so we all know how regulators are always there scrutinizing our activities. So depending on the amount or the impact of regulation that your industry will have, you also need to determine how smart and sophisticated your data governance framework needs to be. So we have looked at the foundational aspects of data governance, establishing a data governance framework. Now we will look at some of the operational aspects. So once you know what your overall data governance framework and office is going to be, you need to understand what are your key data governance activities and what are the tools that you need to implement data governance effectively. The activities at the top, we need to bear in mind that this is iterative in nature. This is not just a one-time exercise. So first, it begins with defining. So define your data governance organization depending on the three main factors that we have seen in the previous slides. Then, perform a readiness assessment. That is, understand what are your as-is data governance processes. What is the appetite? How do you think your data governance strategy is going to go? Do a discovery and performance readiness assessment for that. Thirdly, develop your organization touch points, your overall data governance strategy, implementation roadmap, goals, principles, and policies. Well, this is very self-explanatory, as you know, that you have to understand what is your overall implementation plan is going to be, and what are the key organizational touch points, advocates, champions, data governance offices that you need to establish. Then, engage change management. As I said in my previous slide, depending on the quantum of change management you require, you need to have a really seamless training process, and this really needs to be iterative in nature. Then assess. I briefly mentioned about BCBS 239, which is your Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, and CPG 235 is one of the accounting standards established by APRA for banks in Australia. So again, depending on which industry you are, you need to assess what regulations or standards your company needs to abide by, and the data governance framework that you establish need to have key checkpoints taking into consideration the regulatory requirements. And finally, implement and embed. So implement your data governance framework, but how do you embed it? You do an iterative process all over again. So that is something you need to do iteratively, just so that you ensure that there is an ongoing business case for data governance in order to ensure that you have an ongoing commitment and sponsorship from your leadership team. So once you know the activities, how do you do it, right? You always need to have the tools and the smarts so that you create that transparency and shared clarity across your enterprise. So what tools does a typical data governance office needs to have? First and foremost, online presence. There needs to be a website, whether it's your Confluence, whether it's your company intranet, whatever is the appropriate platform. But you need to have a central place or a program website which will house your charter, your overall strategy, the key training, announcements, changes, linkages to your main data governance policies, standards, then whenever there are reviews and announcements. So there needs to be an online presence just to keep all your data governance officers across the enterprise always informed. Secondly, you need to have a business glossary. This is what I touched upon a little bit earlier when I was explaining metadata. When I say business metadata, and I gave an example of the customer name, right? Again, I work with a bank. Now, what customer name means to the frontline retail business, that may not be the same so I work with enterprise finance, so customer name might be a little bit different for us because we are one of the enablement functions. But the retail frontline team, they would understand customer name a little bit differently. So when this is a recipe for disaster, right? When different teams interpret different business terms in different ways. So you need to have a business glossary where all the key terms are stored, they are defined, and they are agreed upon by data governance officers from different business units. And then those business terms must be linked to the underlying critical data. And once that has been done, the technical lineage has to be also understood. That is, what is the database, what is the column, what is the table, what is the field. So you link all those to your critical data element, and that gets linked to your critical business term. So a business glossary with that sort of linkage to a smart enterprise metadata repository must be there. You need to have workflow tools, right? So there are so many data quality issues, but how you're ensuring that those data qualities are proactively being recorded, that they are being socialized at your executive committees, and they have the traction that they require to get a resolution in a timely and efficient manner. That's why you need robust workflow tools to establish that kind of shared clarity and transparency. Then a document management tool. Again, data governance can have this myriad of policies and standards, and very quickly it can get very confusing. So you need to have a really robust documentation process, a change control in place, so that the teams are always aware where to find what and which standard means what. Finally, a data governance scorecard. Just having the data governance practices and policies in place is not enough. What you also need to do is iteratively do a scoring and analysis of how your data governance practices are really going on in an organization. Over here, there is DCAM assessment also available, so you can go and have a read yourself. So there are various frameworks available in the market to help to assist data governance officers to conduct this scoring from time to time. But a scoring is always essential to pause and take a check of how effective your data governance strategies really are. So next, let us look at what are our implementation guidelines that we need to keep in mind. That is, we now know how to design an overall office. How do we choose a model? We know what our key activities and tools are. But what are really the implementation guidelines? Well, again, I have touched upon these a little bit earlier, so very briefly. Firstly, shift in organization culture. What we need to understand, that data governance is not something like you just leverage, you implement, and you walk away. No. To be able to do this effectively, you really need to bring a shift in the culture, that people need to start understanding data understanding data quality and really imbibe the culture that data quality is everyone's responsibility, this really requires a culture shift and change. So data governance officers must become really champions, advocates, and mascots for this change. Then incremental rollout. Data governance is not something that you can bring 20 standards and policies, just give your implementation teams that, hey, you need to implement this and walk away. No. This needs to be incremental in nature, that you implement certain policies and then see what are the results and then iteratively implement this. Adjustment, flexibility in approach, because not one size fits all. Training strategy needs to be really seamless to ensure that there is a shift in the culture and ongoing communication. We also need to ensure that when we do that scoring iteratively, what are the right metrics that we have in place? The metrics, now again, in one of our previous presentations, we saw that we need to measure what matters. So how do you ensure that you are measuring what matters from a data governance perspective? Firstly, your metric must always measure how your data risks are being reduced. What is the value or contribution that data governance is making to your organization? That must be expressed in some economic terms. Effectiveness. Having the data governance practices in place, what change that it is bringing to your operational day-to-day activities? Is it sustainable? All these policies that you have introduced, is it going to stay? Awareness. Are you creating an awareness across the organization? And finally, what is the ease of its operation and implementation? So these are some of the key factors that you need to bear in mind when you really determine what your metric going to be to measure your data governance. So that finally brings me to the data governance requirements. Every data governance office must have these requirements at its heart. First and foremost, you establish your data governance function, taking into consideration your framework, operating model, and the structure of your organization. Then, you must understand what your key data risks are. Not only understand, but prioritize them. Understand what are the causes of your data risks, and also have key controls and remediation activities in place. Understand what your metadata is, your business metadata, technical metadata, have a smart repository to capture them. Data quality management. Understand how to recognize and identify data quality issues, have a workflow tool to record them, and establish the relationship between your data quality issues and your data risks. Understand how remediating your data quality issues is reducing your data risk profile. That relationship is very important. Data quality metrics. Have metrics in place. When you identify a critical data element, what are the metrics by which you are measuring it? It could be any of those: timeliness, accuracy, completeness, but you do need to identify the primary metric by which you will measure the improvement in the quality of your critical data. Data accountability. You need to establish data owners and data stewards in every department. They need to be aware of their roles and responsibilities, and also need to understand what data they own and how they are going to ensure that the data they own are always accurate and they are of the right quality for use. Finally, education and awareness. I cannot harp upon this factor anymore, that a data governance will not succeed unless and until you have a very robust change management and training in place. And all this will become possible only if you always have a strong business case, so that you can win ongoing commitment from your leadership and your key sponsors. So that brings me to an end, and just want to share that all this content that you saw today, they have been mostly derived from the Data Management Association's DMBOK, that is Data Management Book of Knowledge. There are lots of other frameworks and books available, guides available as well. However, what I have found that this particular book, I can really relate my practical experiences to this very well. So anybody who is interested in data governance framework, I'll strongly urge them to go and take a look. With that, thank you very much for having me here. I thoroughly enjoyed my presentation today.